Great. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our fourth CGS lecture for fall of 2023. My name is Reggie Jackson, and I'm professor of pre-modern Japanese literature and performance in the Department of Asian Languages and Cultures here at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you all here today to hear a lecture from one of our postdocs, Dr. Maura Stephens-Chu. So before we get to Dr. Chu's lecture, first a few general announcements. So please join us 1 week from now, for the next lecture in the fall 2023 CGS Thursday lecture series, listening to the explosive sound of U.S. military aircraft in wartime Japan, which will be given by Dr. Keisuke Yamada, the other 2023-24 postdoctoral fellow here at the University of Michigan Center for Japanese Studies. This lecture is also part of the semester-long University of Michigan Fall 2023 Festival of Asian Music, which offers the public new perspectives on music traditions and adaptations from Japan, Korea, China, and South and Southeast Asia. This lecture will be on the first floor instead of this room, so first floor, Weiser 110, not 1010. For those of you who are attending via Zoom, joining the webinar, we appreciate that you've come here to be with us today. And webcams and microphones have been muted. But we do invite you to use the Q&A function during the lecture to submit any questions you might have, and the presenters will try to address as many of these as possible. The live transcription and closed caption function will be enabled, but if you'd rather not have that on, just go to the bottom right corner of your screen to disable it. Also, please check out our CGS events page and various social media for CGS lectures and music performances that are scheduled for this fall semester. And with those announcements out of the way, it is now my great pleasure this afternoon to introduce our speaker today, Center for Japanese Studies postdoctoral fellow, Dr. Maura Stephens-Chu. Dr. Stephens-Chu is coming to us most recently from having served as a visiting assistant professor of anthropology at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, and she received her Ph.D. and MA in anthropology from the University of Hawai at Mānoa. She specializes in medical and cultural anthropology with an emphasis on embodied experiences of menstruation in contemporary Japan. Broadly speaking, Dr. Chu's multidisciplinary and intersectional research includes theoretical and methodological approaches from anthropology, Japanese studies, gender studies, history, and science and technology studies. She has conducted extensive ethnographic research in Tokyo on young women's perceptions, education, and personal experiences of menstruation and commercial menstrual products. Her historical analysis of Japanese menstrual taboos forms the basis of the research article, From Sacred to Secret, Tracing Changes in Views of Menstruation in Japan, which can be found in the open access journal Silva Iaponicarum. Most recently, Dr. Stephens-Chu has extended her feminist research on menstruation to engage ecological questions in the field of environmental studies. And this can be found in her article manuscript, Being Kind to Women is Being Kind to the Earth, Messages of Femininity and Environmentalism from Japanese Cloth Napkin Companies, which is currently under consideration at the Journal of Asian Studies. Currently, Dr. Stephens-Chu is researching the formation of both layperson and medical understandings of conditions that fall under the umbrella of menstrual irregularity, particularly in their link to individual concerns and national discourses about fertility. Here she argues that rhetoric about the potential endangerment of fertility stems from Japan's emphasis on motherhood as a marker of feminine social success, and that this discourse can have a profound impact on women's health decisions. Dr. Stephens-Chu has also been active as a presenter and organizer at conferences. In 2021, at the annual meeting of the American Anthropological Association, she organized and participated in the roundtable panel, Challenging the Typical Menstrual Experience, Subdisciplinary Approaches to the Anthropology of Menstruation. Dr. Stephens-Chu is also, by all accounts, an experienced and incredibly thoughtful teacher, and has teaching experience for all levels of undergraduate and graduate education. She is comfortable and effective teaching introductory courses on cultural anthropology, as well as upper-level courses on medical anthropology, Japanese culture, and applied anthropology. In these contexts, she uses a combination of ethnographies, films, and collaborative projects in order to engage students. Indeed, I should say that as one of the members of the committee that helped to hire Dr. Stephens-Chu, that when last year's hiring committee was reviewing applicants, Maura's profile stood out to us for the breadth of her teaching profile and, in particular, for how conscientiously she engaged our questions about her pedagogical approaches. Her insight and care on this score impressed us very deeply, and it's been a pleasure to hear from current students and Dr. Stephens-Chu's courses about how attentive she is as an instructor and as a mentor to our current MERS CGS graduate students. So this was something that really stood out among all of the candidates when we were selecting candidates, and it's borne fruit, so we're really happy to know that this is the case. For those of you that might be interested in working with such a remarkable scholar, please know that in the winter semester, Dr. Stephens-Chu will be teaching the 400-level course, so for undergraduates, advanced undergraduates and graduate students, called Ethnographic Japan, which explores the craft of ethnography to examine connections between Japanese studies and anthropology. And I would highly recommend this course to any students interested in gaining a more nuanced, critical perspective on Japanese culture from a very dedicated teacher. So in closing, I'd just like to reiterate how lucky we are here at CGS to have Dr. Stephens-Chu joining our intellectual community for the year and for sharing her expertise with our students and faculty. Today, she'll be presenting a talk entitled, The Power of the Pad, Menstrual Products and Embodied Femininity in Japan. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Maura Stephens-Chu.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson, for such a heartwarming introduction. I'm very happy to be working here at the University of Michigan Center for Japanese Studies this year, as well as talking to you all today about some aspects of my research. So every year in Japan, around 700 million menstrual napkins are produced and consumed. This comes out to over $600 million of revenue in the menstrual product industry. Menstrual products, as I will argue, are tools and technologies which women equip and strategically use to conform to what I call hegemonic menstruality. And so the products that women choose to use out of quite a vast selection of menstrual products are in this way a sort of mediator or potentially a barrier that impacts these women's embodied experiences of menstruation. Women use menstrual products to quote unquote pass as non-menstruators. But when they do so, they may also potentially pass as non-menstruating to themselves. So I'll be taking a look at menstrual product ads, their design, correspondence with industry personnel, and interviews with young college-age Japanese women to kind of take a look at how women choose which products to use, the ways in which they use them, how all of that kind of both reflects and shapes experiences and understandings of menstruation. So a brief kind of overview of what I'll be walking us through today. I'll be talking a little bit about the kind of overall rationale or reason for why I have chosen to study menstruation, as well as my positionality as a researcher, and the research methods that I've used. Then I'll give a background on the menstrual product industry in Japan, as well as looking at some definitions of menstrual products, because that, as we'll see later on, will be tied to people's understandings and choices when it comes to those products. Then I'll get more into the kind of theoretical side, my concept of hegemonic menstruality, how that ties to menstrual product use, and then getting into some details and examples of how women use menstrual products to conceal menstruation, what women do to even conceal menstrual products themselves, see there are multiple layers here, and finally how potentially the products that they use and how they use them impacts their own kind of experiences and interactions with their own menstrual blood and bodies. So overall, today's talk is just a portion of what my book manuscript project is about. And so that project is really more exploring and analyzing lived experiences of menstruation for young women in Tokyo, Japan. And so I am taking the approach that menstruation is not simply a biological phenomenon, but it has these sort of interrelated interactions with, say, sex education, menstrual product design in advertising, public and media discourses on motherhood and women's bodies. All of these sort of interact and shape one another. Critical menstruation studies is a burgeoning field. It's an interdisciplinary field. Recently, in a sort of critical menstruation studies Bible, this huge book, the Palgrave Handbook of Critical Menstruation Studies, in the introduction, Chris Boble writes that menstruation as unit of analysis serves as a gateway to reveal, unpack, and complicate inequalities across biological, social, cultural, religious, and historical dimensions. So in essence, studying menstruation is not perhaps as like super niche as it might seem from the outlook, but taking a look at menstruation, our kind of understandings of it, our experiences with it, we can explore gender relations in society, we can kind of untangle and examine issues of class or socioeconomic status, ethnicity and race, age, ideas of gender and work, for instance. All these other aspects of our lives can be connected to menstruation. I also deal with embodiment. So it's in the title of my talk, and embodiment is kind of a concept that has, different uses, different discourses, depending on different, academic fields. So I wanted to just briefly kind of ground what I mean by embodiment in my work and in my talk today. I kind of take after anthropologists' treatment of embodiment. So Thomas Tortoise, whose quote is here, is an anthropologist who has dealt extensively with this concept. And Tortoise has written that the body is the subjective source or intersubjective ground of experience. So in essence, we live life in our bodies, through our bodies, as our bodies. Embodiment helps us to kind of break down this sort of cultural construct of a mind and body divide. And so we'll see today how then different values, expectations regarding behavior are not simply inscribed on the body as a sort of passive mirror to society, but bodies and ourselves as and with our bodies can interact with the world that we live in. There's this sort of mutual, two-sided dialogue between bodies and kind of broader social structures and phenomena. All right, so my positionality. So, whoops, oh dear, apologies for the noise. All right. So, an anthropologist herself is a research tool through which our observations kind of go through a personal filter based on our own backgrounds, experiences, and training. And so I consider it important to be transparent about my own positionality as a researcher. I'm a white middle-class American woman. I am a scholar from U.S. academic institutions. I have an undergraduate degree, a master's degree, a doctoral degree at this point. And I also consider myself a feminist, both in academic sense, using feminist anthropology theories, and in a personal sense, in that I believe in and kind of aim to address gender inequities. And I can definitely say with certainty that this stance has kind of led me down the path of studying menstruation. At the same time, I aim to practice what is called critical ethnography, to use the resources, skills, and privileges available to me to make accessible the voices and experiences of subjects whose stories are otherwise marginalized. Now, the quote-unquote subjects of my research, young Japanese women in Tokyo who come from middle to upper middle class backgrounds, are not necessarily marginalized, but their stories of menstruation are. And so throughout kind of my larger research project, and including this talk, I hope to kind of build and support environments in which open discussion of menstruation is acceptable and commonplace, because I believe that such opportunities have the potential to reduce stigma around menstruation, to improve issues of gender equity, and positively impact menstruators' health and well-being. However, I don't claim to know what is the right or best way for individuals and societies to approach or deal with menstruation, nor do I wish to impose my own views and practices on others. In fact, a big part of my research is kind of arguing or explaining that our understandings and experiences of menstruation are kind of individually and communally, shaped and experienced and built up through our personal backgrounds and identities, as well as the social structures that we interact with and inhabit. So the kind of data, quote unquote, that I draw on today comes from 12 months of fieldwork. In Tokyo, Japan, I was affiliated with Ochanomizu University, which is a national women's university in Tokyo. So I was a research affiliate there. I did participant observation in various clubs and student groups on campus. I also attended different consumer events put on by menstrual product companies. I did interviews with 23 young Japanese women who were attending university in the Tokyo area, so not just Ochudai students. And I also either had face-to-face interviews or email correspondence with industry personnel ranging from huge corporations to very small companies that produce menstrual products. And at the same time, I paid attention to TV commercials, online advertising, and other kind of textual visual materials related to menstrual products to analyze. Lastly, some kind of qualifiers or caveats to my research in today's talk. One, I would like to acknowledge that not all women menstruate and not all menstruators are women. However, today I will be using women to refer to my kind of specific research participants because all of the women that I talked to during my fieldwork identify as cisgender women. Additionally, all of my interviewees are roughly around the same kind of age, early 20s, and people's knowledge and experiences with menstruation can vary depending on what life stage they're at. So we might see some different trends if I were looking at women who were in their 40s, for instance. Additionally, I'll kind of be focusing on concealment of menstrual blood. There are other ways of concealing menstruation, whether that's concealing potential menstrual odor or sound, or concealing the fact that you have cramps or a headache. That's kind of beyond the scope of today's talk. Additionally, beyond strategically using menstrual products in certain ways, women also have other kind of embodied practices, say changing their daily routines, standing instead of sitting, or wearing certain clothing. So other things beyond menstrual product use that they strategically do in terms of their bodies to kind of deal with menstruation. Again, beyond the scope of today's talk. All right, so let's get into menstrual products in Japan. So what is a menstrual product? If you don't mind a little audience interaction, so can anybody just share different types or kinds of menstrual products that they're familiar with? Yeah.
The tampon, the pad, the cup,
Yeah. Yeah, tampons, pads, cups, discs, yeah. Discs are kind of like cups, but they're disposable, yeah, for the most part. Good, so we've got, a couple different varieties, shapes, types, not to mention even with just pads, you have wings or no wings, you have different kind of absorbency levels or sizes and so on. So what I did was I asked what maybe would be considered a basic question to the companies that I corresponded with, which I asked them, what is the definition of a menstrual product? Specifically, I asked them about seiri yohin, if you're interested in the Japanese vocabulary that I use. So I actually got a variety of responses to what I initially thought was quite a simple question. So Dial, which is a big corporation that has the brand Erisu, said that they only recognize menstrual napkins and that they don't deal with anything else like menstrual shorts or panty liners. Cowl, which has the brand Laurier in Japan, said that menstrual products are a group of products for dealing with women's periods. We think that seiri shorts and panty liners are also menstrual products. And lastly, Natura Moon, which is a smaller company that makes both organic cotton disposable menstrual products as well as reusable cloth napkins, said that a menstrual product is something that absorbs and stops menstrual blood from leaking. We consider seiri shorts and etiquette pouches, so like little bags that you might carry menstrual products in, to be menstrual products. Now, when it comes to panty liners, it's kind of bimyo, like it's kind of iffy whether or not they're menstrual products. So Dial obviously has the kind of like strictest definition in terms of what is and isn't a menstrual product. Cowl and Natura Moon both recognize that women might use products that aren't strictly labeled menstrual products. As you can see, there's kind of a variety of responses when it comes especially to panty liners, because that's kind of like a multifunctional product. They're mainly, more specifically marketed as a product for, say, discharge, or perhaps even like a little bit of light incontinence issues. But they do recognize that sometimes women use them during their periods. Dial said no, Cowl said yes, and then Natura was like, maybe. So it's kind of interesting to see this diversity in response. Similarly, I reached out to Kobayashi Seiyaku, which produces panty liners, and I had requested to talk to them about their menstrual products. However, they responded, our company does not produce menstrual products. We only produce panty liners, which are used when women are not on their period. Therefore, we regretfully cannot fulfill your request. So you can see their stance on panty liners in that response. Now, the kind of variation of what is a menstrual product does kind of have its roots in kind of industry regulations and the law. So in Japan, products for sale often fall under specific categories, and there are often, industry standards that they have to be tested for and meet. So according to the Pharmaceutical Affairs Law, which I think has been renamed the, Act on Securing Quality, Efficacy, and Safety of Products, including Pharmaceuticals and Medical Devices. A lot easier to say Pharmaceutical Affairs Law. Menstrual napkins are quasi-drugs, iyakubugai-hin. Tampons are considered medical equipment, or iryokiki. And then panty liners and reusable cloth napkins that you can find for sale are under the kind of general merchandise category, or zakka. And we'll come back to tampons in a bit, but the fact that they are considered more like medical equipment does potentially relate to the fact that they are inserted into the body. And so there are kind of different kind of perceptions of that among users and industry personnel too. The Ministry of Health, Labor, and Welfare's Pharmaceutical Safety and Environmental Health Bureau, in their document, the Standards for Marketing Approval of Sanitary Napkins, stipulates that menstrual napkins must be white in color. So this excludes cloth napkins from being considered menstrual napkins and able to fall under that category of quasi-drugs. Cloth napkins are often made with organic cotton. Often companies that sell them highlight that they're not bleached and thus are kind of better for the environment and potentially your health. And they come in a lot of different, like, prints and colors. So they're excluded under that stipulation of having to be white. Additionally, it's also interesting to note that this document has an official English translation. And it translates seri shoryohin, which if you kind of translate it literally is just referring to products for dealing with menstruation. They translate it in the official English as sanitary napkins. So it's kind of interesting to see that kind of correlation correspondence there. And so it has an official definition of sanitary napkins. That is, they are quasi-drugs, or iakubugaihin, designed to absorb and treat menstrual blood. So even though women may sort of like off-label use panty liners or tampons for their periods, so those things absorb and treat menstrual blood. They're also white. However, they're under different categories. They're not quasi-drugs, so they're kind of not meeting this definition either. So there are a lot of industry standards, a lot of kind of rules and regulations, and it is a big industry in Japan. The kind of three big players in the industry are Kao, Unicharm, and Dio. Kao, as previously mentioned, has Laurier, and Dio has the brand Erisu, and then Unicharm has the brand Sophie. They're also the company, I think the only company, major company that has tampons. When I asked Dio about the future of the Japanese menstrual product industry, they said that the performance of Japanese menstrual products is at an extremely high level. So hereafter, rather than reducing the chances of leaks, we predict that we're shifting into an era in which consumers choose based on their taste or preference related to design and fragrances. So there are sort of these like value-added attributes, or what I call the accessorization of menstrual products, since pretty much all pads and other products, do a pretty, adequate, if not exceptional job at absorbing menstrual blood. Now, so these three companies have a lot of different variations of similar products. So just these three companies have over 200 different menstrual product items that you can choose from. And so this doesn't even include like generic brands or small companies. And so again, kind of they vary based on things like fragrance or scent, size, design, and so on. But still, absorbency is kind of like the number one quality that they have to have. And we'll take a look at why this is. All right, so we've got a bit of a foundation in what is a menstrual product, what kind are available in Japan. So now I want to introduce more to you about this concept of hegemonic menstruality. So this is what I call the macro public discourse of menstruation that is built up through, say, sex education in schools, through menstrual products available on the market, their advertisements, their design, as well as media discourses on women and their bodies. People encounter and interact with hegemonic menstruality on a daily basis, which takes various forms depending on social, political, economic, and historical context. So this is a concept that could be applied anywhere. And so I'm going to share with you some of the characteristics of hegemonic menstruality in Japan for these young women. So just to kind of put it quite simply, hegemonic menstruality is the quote-unquote correct way to menstruate. That if you conform to this hegemony, arguably you might have more like social capital or power, but at the very least you avoid the stigma of menstruation. So overall, my research investigates the way that these young women embrace, conform, adapt, resist, or even reject aspects of this hegemony. One of the overarching characteristics of hegemonic menstruality is concealment of all signs of menstruation. It also includes sort of linguistic concealment, that is, where and when you can discuss menstruation as well as with whom is quite heavily regulated. Having a monthly menstrual cycle is important. Understanding that menstruation's main purpose is related to reproduction, and in that sense is also a marker of womanhood. Using menstrual napkins, store-bought menstrual napkins, is a must in order to effectively hide menstrual blood from others. And you're also expected to hide any other signs of menstruation. So you can think of, again, like if you've got cramps or a headache, or if you're feeling irritable or fatigued or bloated, kind of hiding all of that as well. So today we'll be kind of focusing mainly on using napkins and other products to conceal menstrual blood and how this both reflects and shapes people's experiences and understandings of menstruation and their menstrual bodies. So overall, we've kind of got this like conflict going on with hegemonic menstruality. That is, to be a woman, you need to be, reproductively fertile. And in order to be fertile, you need a regular monthly menstrual cycle. However, that really super important aspect of being able to have children and thus having a regular period needs to be hidden. That you need to hide, any and all signs of your menstrual cycle and your menstrual status. Relatedly, I'll be talking about menstrual products then as what Sarah calls technologies of passing. That is kind of taking, you might have heard of passing related to issues of, say, minority status in terms of race or gender identity or sexuality, that you can kind of pass as the kind of dominant and safe identity. And so she, as well as I, argue that women then use these technologies, these menstrual hygiene technologies or menstrual products, to pass as non-bleeders and thus present a controlled, orderly, and contained normal female body. Similarly, Laura Miller, who has done work on the Japanese beauty industry, she wrote about beauty work, which she defines as the self-management and discipline that is required to achieve an appropriate body, which indicates good character and self-control. Sculpted bodies symbolize perseverance or determination, while an untamed body means that the person lacks control, is slovenly, weak, and inadequate. So self-management and discipline are indeed what menstruating women must perform. And so the proper and effective use of commercial menstrual products might perhaps be considered another form of quote-unquote beauty work. And the women that I talk to go to great lengths to conceal any sign of their menstrual status from others. However, their behaviors, their strategies, and menstrual products are not infallible. So we'll kind of see what they do to sort of maximize success and what happens when they quote-unquote fail. So again, the kind of main way to conceal menstruation is with the very kind of obvious concealment of menstrual blood. That is, if you see a red stain on somebody's pants, that's kind of a dead giveaway as to what's going on. So the object often is to prevent that from happening. And so absorbing menstrual blood, again, is kind of like the top purpose and the top quality that menstrual products are designed for, and the kind of reasoning behind women's choices. Now, an ideal menstrual product has kind of three main qualities. They're absorbent, they fit well, that is like in your underwear or with your body, and they are comfortable. Now, these three qualities are all kind of interconnected. A napkin that absorbs and fits well will be comfortable. It's more comfortable to have a kind of dry feeling napkin than one that might be kind of heavy or kind of have a leaky feeling. Whereas an absorbent napkin that doesn't quite fit well, or one that fits well but isn't absorbent enough, then may be prone to leaks or pooling of blood, and that's not comfortable. Often more and more we see thin, super thin napkins on the market. They're also surprisingly absorbent, but sometimes, as we'll see, women may choose like a larger or thicker pad than what they may actually need in terms of like volume of blood that needs to be absorbed, but it provides them more peace of mind. So the main way that products fail or that leaks happen and exposure results is with a pad not being absorbent enough or it kind of slipping out of place. That is, it doesn't fit great. So let's take a look at these two, and then I'll talk more about comfort later on. So absorbency, or kyushuroku, is arguably the most important quality that a menstrual product needs to possess. According to my interviewees, whom I asked, what do they like about their menstrual products? What are the characteristics of this sort of like ideal menstrual product for you, whether or not that actually exists? So things like price, brand, packaging kind of meant nothing if the product wasn't absorbent. And so these products help provide peace of mind, or anshin. You can even see anshin in the name of this particular product. So this one is kind of in its name saying that, like, oh, you can have peace of mind all the way until morning, since this is an overnight napkin. So the notion of anshin was brought up quite frequently by the women I talked to. For example, Hitomi said her ideal product definitely wouldn't leak. And even when you're sleeping, you can sleep with peace of mind. I worry, or I have worries or fuan about that myself. So women like Hitomi, who do not have enough peace of mind from their regular napkins, will take extra precautions and use heavy flow or overnight pads, even when not strictly necessary. So these large napkins provide extra protection and thus peace of mind, especially during times when women may not be free to change their napkins for a while. So another interviewee told me that these kinds of pads are bulky, but they help me not worry as much. Tampons are another source of absorbent protection, although very few women in Japan use them. Over 90% exclusively use pads or napkins. Only 3 of the 23 women that I interviewed regularly use tampons. And they all first tried them when they were in college, university. One informant, Ayaka, said that she started using tampons because she was fed up with feeling uncomfortable and getting stains on her bedding at night. She now uses tampons while she sleeps and during heavy flow days. Another woman, Mayu, uses them when she is out and about, like going to class, just times that when she knows that she will be active or unable to visit the restroom for long stretches of time. But these women also wear pads at the same time that they're using tampons, just in case. It's likely easier to judge visually when a napkin is reaching its absorbency capacity, since you can, go to the bathroom and check and visually look at your pad, versus a tampon, which is inserted inside the body, so you can't visually confirm whether or not it's full. And so this learning curve of kind of getting that timing right in terms of changing your products is one reason, among others, that steers many women away from tampons. Several of the women I talked to were, moderately interested in tampons, but they were worried that they would not be good at using them, potentially resulting in a failure or leak. And so as Saki kind of put bluntly, well, aren't napkins simple? Why mess with something more difficult as tampons when napkins, I know how to use them, so I'm all good. So there's kind of a trade-off there then, that tampons are, pretty absorbent, but they also have issues in terms of timing, making sure that you're changing them out regularly enough. However, tampons don't usually have the issue of slipping out of place like pads might and leading to leaks. So people might rely on pads because they feel, unseen, they feel peace of mind with them, but then they do have to deal with this extra hurdle of making sure that it stays in place. So one feature that a lot of pads have are wings. So this is this extra material on the sides, just to show for those who are unfamiliar. And so it's also adhesive, so you kind of tuck it onto the, the exterior of your underwear to help hold it in place. Wingless pads might bunch up in the center, exposing the undergarments and outer clothes to menstrual blood. All but one of my 23 interviewees preferred winged pads. In fact, besides being reliably absorbent, having wings was the most desired quality of a menstrual napkin. However, even with wings, pads are not guaranteed to stay in place. In each interview, I asked what qualities of their menstrual products that they were satisfied with and which that they thought needed improvement. And many complained that the pad would slip out of place, like zureru, zurechao. The pad might have a bad fit, or the pad might even leak around the wings. So if the kind of standard adhesive of pads and the additional stickiness of wings is not always enough, then what do women do? Well, the answer is, in Japan at least, these products, sometimes called sanitary shorts or period shorts. So you might see in Japanese sanitary shortsu or seiri shortsu. So this is underwear that is specially designed to work well with menstrual pads. It's not like the Thinx period underwear, even though it has a similar name. So it's not necessarily designed to absorb menstrual blood itself. So many styles have black fabric, as you see here, and are made of, a synthetic material that is, stretchy and easy to wash. There are several design variations depending on the brand, including high-waisted shapes and double-lined crotches. Some even have one or two built-in pockets for carrying extra menstrual napkins, which was an important feature mentioned by some of my interviewees, especially when they were in grade school, where carrying your bag to the restroom to change your pad was rather conspicuous. think, let's see, about 18, at least 18 of my interviewees regularly use seari shotsu. And some were quite surprised to hear that this wasn't really a thing in the US. And so I got several responses related to that. Whereas Miki asked, well, what do you do at night then if you don't have this? And you just put it, the pad in your regular underwear? Like, doesn't it slip that way? And another shiori commenting, well, you need seari shotsu to use winged napkins. So the shape of this particular underwear helps to kind of hold the pad snug against the body, helps reduce the chance that it'll slip out of place. And, just in case, they're black, so if there are leaks or stains, it's not as big of a deal. And several commented that they're pretty easy to wash because of the material that they're made out of. All right, so we've kind of looked at absorbency, we've looked at fit, the kind of limitations of products related to that and how women respond to them. But another kind of layer to concealing menstruation, beyond concealing menstrual blood through the use of products, is concealing the products themselves at kind of all stages of the product's quote-unquote life. That is, from buying the products in stores, to storing them someplace before use, using or applying them, and disposal. I asked Dio about online sales of menstrual products, and they say that this has been increasing over the years. And they said that particularly women in their late 20s do a lot of online shopping. And they say that there are a lot of people who order online, who order menstrual products online because it takes less time and it is not embarrassing. Interviewees' experiences with and feelings on purchasing menstrual products, whether it's at a drugstore or the campus bookstore or a grocery store, a lot of them felt some discomfort or embarrassment. Only a small number didn't really care, for instance, whether the cashier they had was male or female. And some actually avoided the whole ordeal by buying online or like buying a year's supply at one time so they don't have to do it super frequently. So most of my interviewees preferred, if possible, having a female cashier. One, in part, because there was a concern male cashiers would not know that you're supposed to put menstrual products in a black bag to kind of hide from view what the product is when you're carrying around your shopping. Because a lot of plastic bags in Japan are more on like the translucent side, whereas here a lot of plastic bags are like white. It's harder to see the interior. This is a little bit different in a lot of shops in Japan. Additionally, even with storage, products might be concealed. Can anyone spot the menstrual product in this image? It's tough, yeah? Yeah. These are the pads right here in their wrapper. And so this was specifically designed, this is the center in line of the Sophie brand of Unicharm. It was the wrapper of the pad as well as the shape, the sort of compact slim shape, was designed so that it doesn't stand out as a menstrual pad among your belongings. All right, so in terms of use, that is concealing the product while using it, as well as disposing of it. So several women were kind of self-conscious of the potential like outline or shape of the pad being visible on their pants. I don't know if folks have experience with that, or at least a worry about that. So there were desires for like thinner pads, or just making sure there are ones that present a smooth shape that don't show the outline of the pad. Additionally, for instance, when I asked Mayu about a strong memory she had related to menstruation, she told me the following story. She said, back when I was in elementary school, when I first got my period, I went to the bathroom together with my friends, and I was the only one having a period that week. I would try not to make a sound to open my napkin. Sure, maybe other folks have tried to do that, like just very slowly and quietly as possible, trying to open the wrapper of the napkin. I remember that there was no garbage can in the individual stall, but then outside next to the sink there was this big garbage can, and you can put it in that if you're alone. But then if you're with your friends, you can't, right? You know, you don't want to be seen carrying a used napkin. So I flushed it down the toilet. So that way I could just come out with nothing. So this is kind of one early example, and later on Maya was like, yeah, I realized later that that's not good for the plumbing and that napkins aren't designed to be flushed down, but she just really didn't want to be spotted with it. But even today, in many public restrooms, there are sound masking devices, as well as napkins that are advertised with crinkle-free wrappers. And as mentioned earlier, some of the seari shotsu have built-in pockets for holding extra napkins. And this is really helpful for school-age girls who can more inconspicuously go change their pads in the bathroom. I briefly mentioned the fact that when you buy products, they come in little black bags. Additionally, when it comes to disposing of them, if you've been in Japan, especially in cities, you might kind of see dumpsters, as we have them in the US, are not like necessarily as common, that you might just see kind of piles of trash bags with netting over them or in a sort of mesh container. And a lot of the trash bags are also rather translucent. So to keep from prying eyes, to keep from visual perception, women then do take extra steps to conceal their used menstrual products. So they might put it in like separate little bags and then put it in the regular trash, for instance. One interviewee in particular was very specific about how she disposed of her products, that she would wrap it up in toilet paper, but then it's still kind of visible from the sides. So then she would wrap it again to completely conceal the product. And so she wished that there was like a napkin with a wrapper that already had that design, that function in mind. And they actually do now, I've just noticed. All right, let's get into this kind of final level. We're in inception, we're going down to that final level. Concealing menstruation from the self. So again, Sarah Vostral writes about menstrual products as technologies of passing, a way for women to represent themselves to others as belonging to a more appealing and acceptable identity, that is, of a non-bleeder. However, she argues, this representation is both outward and inward. The act of technological passing presents an altered external identity, but also requires the technological user to agree to a sort of temporary amnesia. Menstrual hygiene technologies allow for temporary passage to forget time of the month, as one ad claimed, and get on with life as if menstruation were not occurring. So disposable menstrual pads allow users to forget their quote-unquote true identity as a menstruant, at least temporarily. And so Vostral asks, okay, well, what problems lurk beneath artifacts, that is, menstrual products, seamlessly integrated into personal identities of passing? What dangers are overlooked when a technology becomes ubiquitous and naturalized? So these products often shape our own experiences and understandings and relationship with our bodies, our menstrual selves. A lot of ads, including the one that Vostral mentioned, kind of tout as a benefit of the product that like, oh, it's so, it works so well, it's so comfortable that you'll forget that you're even on your period. So we've got that here, seari wasurete masu. This is for a tampon product. but we see this in other ads as well. So there are a couple things that I want to highlight regarding this sort of concealment from the self and how these products impact people's embodied experiences. One is sort of more affective, this kind of constant worry hovering around people's minds throughout their period, that they know that their menstrual products are not perfect. They know that they have to have the timing right, they have to have the skill and experience, and as well as the sort of bodily awareness to make sure that they never leak. And when I asked interviewees about kind of impactful or lasting memories related to menstruation, I often got stories like this about times when they failed to conceal menstruation, especially in public. So one woman, Dina, recounted a story of being out at a restaurant and suddenly, getting her period starting and getting on the chair. And this was something that happened, in high school several years ago, and still was quite like a vivid memory for her. Another Yui said that, she does get leaks quite a bit. And because of those leaks, which are stressful and annoying and embarrassing, because of them, she doesn't like her period. So here we can directly see how kind of this mindset of needing to conceal menstruation through the use of products can impact, our feelings and experiences and behaviors. So she gets really, stressed out and worried if she's delayed from visiting the restroom when she feels like she needs to. And similarly, Mayu says that the worst thing about my period, even beyond things like menstrual cramps, is having to constantly have this in mind, to have this constant worry. Will I be too late, or will I make it? It disrupts your normal routine. And so again, with comfort, we have this sort of erasure of menstruation, possibly even from the self. So this is another ad that is talking about like, oh, while wearing it, you'll forget you're even wearing a pad. Like, it's so comfortable and effective. And I want to bring us back to tampons, which again are classified as quote unquote medical equipment or devices. The kind of aversion to tampons is kind of twofold. One, to use and change out your tampon is quite different from interacting with a pad, so that you might indeed touch menstrual blood, get your hands dirty. This was mentioned by several women as one of the reasons why they didn't want to use tampons. Additionally, the act of inserting something into the vagina was also sort of an averse experience that lingered for a lot of women. And this perhaps reflects sex education growing up, as well as societal ideas about appropriate sexual behavior for women. So here we have comments that perhaps, using a tampon seems kind of scary. I'm not used to sticking anything up there, as they said. And so there's this, again, sort of default then to pads, which themselves lead to certain, experiences with menstruation. I also asked menstrual product companies about this sort of trend of over 90% of women in Japan using napkins. And they also kind of highlighted how this might be tied to sex education. So Dayo also mentions the quote-unquote hygiene aspect, that you can use napkins without getting your hands dirty, so without coming into direct contact with your own menstrual blood. Additionally, there's a reluctance to insert tampons inside the body. And so this might be related to sex education. Cowell said something similar, that like many people might consider using tampons to be scary or difficult. And kind of similar to Saki earlier, who's like, well, napkins are just simple, so why would I try tampons? They're like, okay, well, napkins are like really good, so why would you even want to try something else? Lastly, we have other products beyond tampons and pads. There are menstrual cups, as mentioned earlier, as well as reusable cloth napkins. However, cups, again, are not super popular because you have to insert them just like tampons, and you might touch menstrual blood. Same with cloth napkins, because you need to wash those by hand in order to reuse them, which is kind of viewed as an annoyance or dirty or gross by people. However, at the same time, proponents of cloth napkins say that this more direct interaction with your body and with menstrual blood can be positive, can be beneficial, that it might lead to a greater intimacy or care for yourself and for your body, especially during menstruation. And so in a sense, cloth napkins, say these proponents, are sort of a gateway to positive thinking about your period rather than viewing it as just a bother or annoyance. So we have these potential transformations that might take place that are all hinged on what product you use. So in conclusion, again, just wanting to highlight how we have a huge menstrual product industry in Japan. Women have a lot of different choices when it comes to their products, but they make specific strategic choices, and they adopt certain bodily behaviors and practices to maximize their chances at successfully concealing menstruation. And we might imagine, other understandings of, other opinions and experiences related to menstruation if people use different products. So with that, I would like to say thank you for listening to my talk, and I'm happy to answer any questions that y'all may have.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Stephens-Chu, for that really stimulating talk. So at this point, we're happy to entertain any questions from our audience here in the room, but also from any of those of you that are listening on Zoom as well. You can use the Q&A function in Zoom to ask any questions you might have, and we're happy to proceed. Yeah, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stephens-Chu, for your very interesting and important lecture. I just had a quick question. You touched on this a little bit in your talk about how menstrual products and technologies are disposed of, but I want to ask how this is dealt with in areas where trash is separated and how different technologies are separated in that instance. Thank you.
Oh, good question. Yeah, so in Japan, there is a lot of separation of like trash and recyclables. For instance, you might separate out, your milk cartons and aluminum cans, other different types of plastic and so on. So menstrual products are burned when they're incinerated, when they're collected by trash collectors. So that is a bit of a different treatment from potentially other household trash and recyclables. There are services in other countries, actually. It's not widespread of rental napkins and diapers. So this is for reusable ones, but it's taken to like a central location where they're all washed and then rented back out. So that helps to cut down on some waste. In fact, cloth napkins are often kind of used for people who are environmentally conscious and want to cut down on waste. Because again, we have, 700 million napkins used annually. And that throughout a woman's life, she'll use like over 10,000 napkins or similar products. So I think the women I talked to in terms of disposal would put their products into like the kitchen trash. It's the kind of general trash that then goes to the incinerator. So maybe with like other like food waste and stuff like that.
Great. Please, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you so much for such an interesting and I agree, like very important talk. I was curious, like in the marketing and in people's lives, how they choose products. or even like avoid activities for things like swimming, or if they're wearing certain types of clothing, or in like sports activities where, at least in America, sometimes pads aren't like the best choice, or you just can't do them if you're swimming. So I was just kind of curious about that, because I know you said you observed some like club activities and things like that.
Right,
you.
yeah. So often the sort of impetus for, say, trying out tampons for the first time would be that you have like a beach trip or an onsen trip planned with friends or family, and oh, you get your period. And so somebody's like, well, why don't you try this? So that might often be like the first tampon use experience for young women. So we have, those different activities shaping it. When I talked to young women who had irregular menstrual cycles, they often said that one of the really negative things about having an irregular cycle that is not really being able to predict when your period will start is that it kind of messes up plans that they've made in advance, that they weren't expecting their period and they're on this beach trip, so I guess I'll go on like a cycling sightseeing tour instead of swimming kind of thing. So we have that aspect as well. Women will also like maybe not wear like skirts or tight-fitting clothing during their periods, again, to kind of make sure that pad isn't visible. For sports, so one of the clubs that I was active in was the karate club on campus, and so I did talk to some members of the club. Some said rarely they would skip practice if their period was super heavy, but otherwise they might use a tampon, although most tampon users use them along with pads at the same time, so it's not like tampons replace pads in the end. So we have, those different behaviors as well. Does that help answer your question? Yeah.
So firstly, thank you for a very interesting talk. I was wondering, so as Japan ages, if you could speak to, say, like maybe changing perceptions or viewpoints on like these products and the experience.
Right, yeah, that's a good question. A lot of the advertising, for instance, does feature young women. Like in their late teens, early 20s. You don't see, when it comes to menstrual products, say, a representation of women in their 30s or 40s that much. However, I was just checking recently, because they come out with new lines of products all the time, that there is a relatively new line that does feature older women, like moms and stuff like that. And it was that one was specifically focused on solving the problem of pads slipping out of place. So they were talking about women leading active lifestyles, whether it was exercise or going shopping. They had images of like a woman on a bike with like her baby, her little kid in the back seat, or at work when they're in a long meeting. So with the aging population in Japan and the kind of shrinking workforce, in terms of public discourse around like women's role in society, while it's still expected for women to be mothers, it's also expected that they're active in the workforce too. So I think perhaps, advertising and product design has kind of changed to potentially address those trends as well. So, one of the taglines for this product was like, oh, if you're in meetings all day, you don't have to worry about, the absorbency not being up to snuff, for instance. So I think there's also like pain medications and other products that expect women to be like, in the workplace, and they don't want, a headache or cramps or a heavy flow to like get in the way of their productivity, for instance. So I think there's maybe kind of shifts in that respect, that there's a more explicit acknowledgement of women working and being active outside the house, that then kind of shows in these advertisements and designs.
Thank you for your presentation. One of the things that I was curious about was something that I learned was that in other countries or societies, the notion around inserting tampons and virginity is rooted in religion. But from my understanding of Japanese culture, at least today, it's mostly like agnostic society. So I'm curious as to what the source of that purity culture comes from if it's not religion.
Right. Yeah, that is a great question. So part of it does historically have to do with ideas around women's sexuality and chastity, I guess you could say. When the first commercial tampon in Japan was introduced in 1938, it was specifically marketed toward married women. The advertisement kind of addressed the reader as okusama, so kind of like Mrs. And until the 1970s, actually, the association in charge of hygiene products in Japan had a regulation that tampons, again, could only be marketed toward married women. That changed in the 70s, but they still had stipulations that women who aren't used to this product should maybe consult a doctor for advice or instructions. So I think in general, it's not necessarily tied to religion, like you said, in other countries, but there still might be an expectation that a good woman is chaste, is perhaps not, doesn't necessarily have a strong sexual appetite, as well as perhaps emphasis in sex education that sex is for procreation and not necessarily for pleasure or only for pleasure. So there's that aspect as well where perhaps young women growing up aren't really instructed, or perhaps they're also discouraged from, say, touching their bodies sexually, and so they're just not used to touching their genitals at all, and so even a non-sexual act like inserting a tampon is kind of nerve-wracking to them, unless they've perhaps know people who've used tampons or have had sexual experiences. But yeah, thank you for your question.
We have a couple questions from the online audience as well,
Sure.
Maura. So we have actually two questions from Professor Ili Wu. Hi, Ili. So the first question, she says, thanks for a wonderful talk. Although I know your talk focused on cisgender women, I was curious to know whether awareness of transgender health might be influencing people's awareness of the discourses surrounding menstruation, including the discourses that make up hegemonic menstruation.
Great question, thank you. So actually, in Japan, while I was there, for instance, Otadai, which is a women's university, kind of made the news in terms of their acceptance of trans women students, because that was kind of, I think, something new for the university. I think also broadly, more and more, in different parts of the world, if I can speak generally about this topic, using more, I guess, gender-neutral terminology, using terms like menstruator or people who menstruate rather than saying women, and assuming that is the category or appropriate label for people who menstruate. So I think also in critical menstruation studies as a field, there are quite a number of scholars who explore trans experiences of menstruation, both for folks who have uteruses and menstruate and those who don't, and how they kind of experience and deal with their bodies in that regard.
And then there's a second question from Professor Wu, who asks, to what extent are sexist, misogynist tropes of menstruation part of the environment contributing to hegemonic menstruation? To what extent is this a concern of Japanese feminists?
Oh, that is another good question. I think there is definitely, in terms of perhaps advertising, really like a hyper feminine imagery and things like that, such as this one right here. And so that perhaps might be a sort of essentialization of femininity that is with hegemonic menstruality. Menstruation is about reproduction. It signifies that you are a woman, and thus only cisgender women menstruate. And we have like these, soft, light pink colors. We have the ubiquitous like white dress in the advertisements, things like that. And as well with hegemonic menstruality, in terms of, say, the sort of affective concealment of menstruation, that you're expected to kind of hide your fatigue or your irritation or foul mood, that kind of socially as a woman you're expected to be nice and pleasant. So in that sense, you might connect that to misogyny. So those are a couple different ways that I see that connected. And with menstruation, with feminists in Japan, as well as other places, there are different kind of flavors of feminism. And so in Japan, for instance, since the mid-20th century, there's been a practice where, depending on the company, women can take menstruation leave, which is practiced in a couple other countries as well. But there are both proponents and opponents of menstruation leave as a practice so people on each side might identify as feminists. So there are kind of different approaches to that. One, embracing this sort of essentialized femininity through like menstruation, womanhood, reproduction, and fertility. And on the other hand, saying like, oh, menstruation leave makes us seem like the weaker sex, so to say. So it is kind of a multifaceted issue. But yeah, thank you for your questions.
We'll take one question here and then another from online.
Hi. So this, I assume, relates to other facets of your research more than just this specific presentation. Mm-hmm. But you mentioned early on, both like the idea of the perceptions of menstrual irregularities and the idea of like discipline. So I was wondering about like diseases such as PCOS and the kind of the way that affects not only menstruation, and it also has like physical symptoms such as hirsutism and weight gain, and how like that stuff like that is viewed when it's it's not about discipline, it's a physical problem.
Right. Yeah, I think awareness of PCOS and endometriosis and similar conditions is kind of growing in Japan, especially through like social media. Like when I talk to women about like where they first encountered, if they don't themselves experience it, social media was often the source. And when it comes to like irregular cycles, for instance, that was often the impetus for some women to try out like the hormonal birth control pill, like the low dosage pill that you take daily, and in order to regulate their cycle, in order to have a regular cycle. So in that sense, often, for them having an irregular cycle, one, got in the way of their regular day-to-day routines with this unpredictability of menstruation and getting caught off guard, and then having like their menstrual blood leak and be seen. And then on the other hand, there were worries about their kind of future fertility. Now, these women weren't yet at the life stage of having children or even making fully formed decisions about whether or not they'd have children. But having an irregular cycle for them was connoted perhaps with something perhaps not being right with their fertility, that maybe this indicates a future problem with fertility, so they want to address it now to kind of appease or address those worries. But I don't, to my knowledge, I didn't talk with anyone directly who had PCOS or another condition like that, but I did talk to several women who had irregular menstrual cycles. Thank you.
I have a question. Oh, no, but the student has a question. Go ahead, please.
I was wondering, I know this wasn't the focus of your research, but perhaps you have talked to people about this with foreigners in Japan, what their experience is using the menstrual products there, especially in terms of, did they like them better? Are they neutral about it? Like, especially in comparison to like products here, did they find these extra qualities unnecessary, or did they actually like them even though it wasn't necessarily a highly regarded like standard in their own eyes at first?
Gotcha. Yeah, I do feel like people in general are just kind of more comfortable with what they are used to, what they've grown up with. Conversely, to what you asked, I have talked to Japanese people who like lived abroad and brought or ordered Japanese menstrual products because they didn't like the ones overseas. But in terms of folks in Japan who are from elsewhere, there are some aspects of them that they liked, like having the size of the pads on the packaging. So those are often like put on there as like the length, so like in centimeters or millimeters. So having that more specific guidance to the size of the napkin was helpful. Some folks were kind of frustrated with the limited options when it came to tampons. That is, there's pretty much just like one brand of tampons. So if you don't like them, then you're kind of out of luck. So there is that aspect as well, being like struggles to find tampons that they like or that worked well for them. And of course, potential other products like cups and whatnot. So I'm trying to recall like casual conversations with others, but I think that was kind of the gist of it. And then scented products, I think most people I talk to are like, no way, would never do that. Even though there are a lot of options in different scents available.
We have one more online question. So this is from Ernie King, who asks, approximately how much does each product cost, and is price a factor in people's choices?
Oh gosh, unfortunately I cannot recall off the top of my head the costs of products, but I can say that at least some of the women I talked to did make decisions based on price. They weren't like super diehard loyalists when it came to specific brands. Like they might try out a different brand if it was on sale when they went to the store, or it might also depend on their budget. A lot of women still lived at home, so their mom would buy the menstrual products, so they didn't really know about or care about price in that sense. But women who were living on their own for the first time, for instance, were now buying menstrual products for the first time for themselves. So some did take price into consideration. I do know that there are both worldwide and in Japan kind of movements and discussions going on regarding period poverty and equity regarding access to and availability, being able to afford menstrual products. Those discussions are increasing more and more over the years. But for the women that I talked to, they weren't really facing financial hardship, but still price could be one of the deciding factors, yeah.
I have a question, and I think we have one more question to close up. But so it's super, and so many questions I have actually, so I look forward to kind of hearing more. But I mean, at least two things kind of came to mind here. And one, I was just wondering if you could say a bit more about this discourse of anshin, and kind of basically when that starts to become part of the marketing, and maybe speculate as to why that is. I mean, I was really interested to know when you said that in the 70s there's basically a kind of shift potentially in terms of how these things are being marketed, and I'm just wondering a little bit about like when a discourse of safety and of trying to make oneself safe actually becomes more attractive or more kind of economically viable as one thing. The second question I had was just to go to one of the first slides you had about the seiri panchi. And it's probably related to maybe Eli's question about the kind of feminist responses. And I'm really convinced by your argument about this notion of hegemonic menstruation and these different discourses that are kind of imposing or kind of inviting a kind of self-discipline. But I also wonder if there's not some kind of discourse or counter-discourse from feminists, or even if it's kind of in a comic vein, about like what menstruation allows in terms of kind of anti-hegemonic or kind of anti-masculinist, or kind of does this period actually allow for a different kind of assertion or a certain kind of violence that then becomes more available or more kind of licit or something because it's a kind of a special kind of situation. So any thoughts about those would be great. Yeah.
So with anshin, anshin can mean like safety, but also things like peace of mind, ease. And so that might be kind of paired with or even contrasted with anzen, which is more directly like safety, like the safety of like equipment, or like you often see anzen daiichi like at construction locations. And I think, doesn't Aya Kimura talk about anshin and anzen in her book about potential food contamination after the 3/11 nuclear disaster? And so anshin beyond menstrual products does have these sort of like cultural and psychological philosophical connotations like beyond anzen. So anzen almost is like more objective or perhaps scientific, whereas anshin, peace of mind is perhaps a bit more like psychological or personal, that, what is anshin for you might not be for someone else and vice versa. But you do see this term come up a lot, say on product websites, in product names like that one overnight pad, and then was also just brought up organically in a lot of my conversations. Conversely, you also see shinpai, worry, a lot in advertisements. Like this commercial had a jingle with it, but yeah, it talked about like worry about smell becomes zero. I was like, "Niyoi no shinpai zero." So you see the kind of opposite of anshin, shinpai, also invoked. In fact, some ads might sort of, I think, kind of generate shinpai where there was none before. So there's that side of it. And in terms of like kind of counter discourse, I think if you look at companies that produce cloth napkins, there's, even though it's sort of highlighting a sort of essentialized femininity, they often talk about kind of embracing menstruation as like this powerful phenomenon that only women experience. So again, that's something I would kind of take issue with, but that's kind of the discourse going on that side of things. And in fact, I forgot, I also brought these books from people who think that you don't need period products at all, that women in the past could control their menstrual flow. So they could, by engaging their pelvic muscles and other muscles, be able to dispel menstrual blood into the toilet when it was convenient for them. And this was, also related to just ideas about like just the power of women, especially in relation to fertility and the reproductive cycle. So there's a couple counter discourses out there for sure.
We're at, I think, at time, but we have time for one quick question, and then we will close out. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Maura, for the very interesting talk. I have two questions, very
Okay.
quick two questions.
Okay.
What does the history of menstrual products look like, especially the development of menstrual product with contact with other countries such as the United States during the Cold War? And another question is I was wondering how your study here might relate with sensory studies, sensory history, and the anthropology of the senses, especially if we might look at the development of menstrual product and how sensory history, as well as feminist studies, we can talk about based on these frameworks.
Right, thank you. Yeah, so the history, I cut that out of my presentation. But commercial menstrual products in Japan started around the turn of the 20th century with menstrual belts. So in the past, pads didn't have an adhesive. You had to like clip them into place in your underwear. So that's what the belts were for. As well as dashimen, absorbent cotton, which had multiple uses, but was also used to absorb menstrual blood. And then in 1961, the anne napkin was introduced, and their whole tagline was 40年お待たせしました, because it came out 40 years after Kotex came out in the United States. So they were kind of directly tying their product to American or overseas products in that sense. So that was 1961. And then by the end of that decade, I would say over 80% of women surveyed by Mainichi Advertising Company had switched to using either anne or like a similar style of like modern menstrual napkin. And then in the 70s, the kind of material shifted from mostly like kami, like wood pulp, to like an absorbent polymer material. So using kind of petroleum-based products. So that's also where environmentalists come into the picture to kind of critique the industry. And that also potentially can come from overseas. Another reason that tampons aren't super popular is fears about toxic shock syndrome, especially based on a particular outbreak of that in, I would say, what was it, the early 80s in the US. So there's definitely kind of awareness of and ties to other companies and events happening related to menstrual products around the world. And then also very briefly about sensory studies. Yeah, I am really interested in making connections with, say, sensory anthropology and other aspects, both methodologically and theoretically. I didn't talk today about menstrual odor in scented products. That's kind of like a big thing that sets apart the Japanese menstrual product industry from, say, the US, this emphasis on smell and fragrances in products. And I talked briefly about like the auditory concealment with those crinkle-free wrappers. And didn't talk too much, maybe a little bit about kind of tactile experiences with the, I guess, the texture of the products, as well as whether or not you come into tactile contact with menstrual blood. So there's a lot there that I do try to connect to and consider to be like one of my favorite parts of this work is those kind of sensory connections and relations. So thank you for your questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Stephens-Chu, for those really wonderful answers to our questions. And we look forward to seeing more of your research as it comes out in print, and also would encourage any students to take your class next semester. I'm sure they'd learn a lot, as we have today. So please join me in thanking again Dr. Maura Stephens-Chu.